Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar. My name's Michelle Wong, and I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at Visually, which is now part of Scribble Live. And over the next 45 minutes, we'll be taking a look at the top hurdles that marketers commonly encounter when developing and executing their content strategies, and we'll provide best practices on how to make sure that you're maximizing your ROI. But before we get into the presentation, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. So we'll be emailing everyone the presentation afterwards, and the recording will be available on the Visually website. There's also going to be a Q&A session at the end, so if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat box located on the bottom right hand of your screen. So moving on to today's speakers, here with us we have Allison Rush from LinkedIn and Becca Colbor from Visually. Allison is the Content Partner Lead for LinkedIn and has over 15 years of experience in digital marketing across a variety of perspectives, including client, agency, and sales. Her areas of focus include content marketing, social media, and ad tech. And in her current role at LinkedIn, she advises B2B advertisers on content solutions that will drive their individual business outcomes. And she's established a network of partners with companies like Visually, in order to bring custom content programs to her clients. Becca is the VP of Client Services at Visually, and she leads the operational strategy. She's led the change in growing accounts and projects for brands like Google, MTV, ESPN, NASA, GE, and the list goes on. She's also developed and implemented digital strategies across a variety of industries, including consumer, energy, healthcare, and nonprofit, just to name a few. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Allison.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everybody. Before we get started, if there are 3 things I'd like you to take away from this webinar, it would be, first, if you feel like your content marketing leaves a lot to be desired, don't worry, you're not alone. Basically, everyone feels the same way about their content programs. But there are a couple things that you should be doing to improve. The first is you need to make sure you're promoting the right content at the right stage of your audience's customer journey. And 2, whether or not your program is hitting its goals, you should always be testing new things, because even the most seemingly insignificant tweak, like adding a stat to your social post, can lift performance. Next slide, please. So to my first point, while B2B marketers are investing more in content marketing this year, only 22% claim to be really successful at it. That's according to Content Marketing Institute. And that's primarily because they don't have a sound strategy in place, or they don't have the right resources aligned. And while we've worked with tons of B2B content marketers, we're learning new things all the time. We want to share some of the latest best practices to help you make your content marketing easier and more effective. Next slide, please. First, it sounds obvious, but you need to focus on your target customers and what matters to them. A lot of brands miss out on a huge opportunity when marketing on LinkedIn because they only use our platform to promote their products and services or to promote job postings. But people now come to LinkedIn more to stay informed about their industry, to get career advice, and to become better at their jobs. So you want to make sure you're publishing content that addresses those things, as well as the content that helps you hire and sell. But we know it can be difficult to know where to start. Next slide. So we recommend starting with a content audit. And that's because you likely have existing content that's right for B2B marketing, and it might just require some optimization, like making it more snackable for social. You also probably have gaps in your content. A lot of brands we've audited have some of that great awareness-building content like a blog, but no heavyweight content like a research report or a case study to help drive consideration. And also, to help you scale and to optimize, you should be repurposing your content and continually be testing. And an audit can help you with all of this. Our advice is to hire a third party to do your audit because they'll be more objective and critical in ways that'll help you really improve. Also, you may have a lot of stakeholders at your company who are creating content, and an audit will serve as a universal truth that everyone can rally around. Dozens of LinkedIn advertisers have benefited from Visually's audits, Recently, we did an audit for a tech client, and the results of the audit showed them that they weren't tailoring their content to the different stages of the buyer's journey. Instead, they were just promoting the same general product information to everybody. Effectively, they were addressing the what and not the why. The why should focus on the business problems that your company solves. And depending on how new or complicated your solution is, you might need to start by convincing people that they have a problem in the first place. One of the recommendations from the audit that we thought was particularly interesting is that they're going to be creating an infographic that IT managers can use to make the business case for the brand's technology to their CFOs. Next slide. So if you don't have the resources for a third-party audit, one way to think about your audience's buyer's journey is this. What are all the questions that your audience will need answered in order to make a decision? And if you need help identifying some common questions, a few simple hacks are to ask your customer service reps, or check with your call center, or even check your company's website's FAQs, or check Google Analytics for some of the common search terms. And once you've done your research, and you know what information your audiences need at each stage of their customer journey, you need to make sure that you're creating content that will resonate. Next slide. Anne Hanley from the Marketing Prof came up with this formula for innovative content. So she says that to be innovative, it has to be useful, it has to be enjoyable, and it has to be inspired. And I'm sharing this because LinkedIn's own content marketing team uses this as a filter when they're coming up with content ideas. So I mentioned scaling your program, and we found that the most effective way to do this is to pick a primary theme or topic to own for an extended period of time. Maybe it's a year, maybe longer. You want to pick something that's broad enough that it supports related subtopics so you can keep your content fresh. So an example that's particularly popular in the tech space is the future of work. That's a popular theme with the relevant subtopics being automation, artificial intelligence, and cloud computing. Remember that whatever topic you pick, you want to make sure that your content is in your authentic voice and it's tied to your unique perspective and value, otherwise it will just get lost in the feed. Next slide. If you need help with identifying themes or topics, there are a lot of tools that are available to you. LinkedIn offers trending content, which will show what topics and articles are trending among specific audiences on our platform. This data helps our marketers both identify immediate and newsworthy trends so that they can be more topical with their content, as well as more evergreen topics that can be used for more sustainable content. And when we're conducting audits with Visually, we typically see one of two scenarios. Either the client has a hero asset, like a research report or a white paper, and we refer to this as a big rock, but they lack more snackable social content to generate awareness. Or we see the opposite, that they have a lot of lightweight content, like a lifestyle blog, but nothing more in depth that drives consideration and helps the brand capture leads. Next slide, please. Our recommended approach is to take that key content theme you've identified. Let's say it's the future of work. And then create a quarterly research report on those related subtopics, like a report on the top jobs that will be impacted by automation. And the key is to produce something that's consistent and repeatable, and if you execute it well and you thoughtfully promote it, this will train your audiences to seek out the latest version, which helps establish you as a thought leader in your category. And what you see on the screen is an example of how we do this with our own sophisticated marketer's guides for LinkedIn. So these are different versions of that quarterly big rock piece of content that I mentioned. Okay, so the next slide, please. So from that big rock, you want to create derivative content, like blog posts that tell the story behind the companies you've profiled in a trends piece, or in this case, an infographic that summarizes the key findings in your research report. And this is how you efficiently scale your content and maintain the consistency of your message. Next slide. So if you've tried all of this and you're still not seeing the ROI you want, the key is to keep testing. And just because you might have posted an article and gotten only a few shares, it doesn't necessarily mean that your article is terrible. You might just need to optimize your social post to better promote it. We've done a ton of testing and have identified a few best practices for images and copy for the social posts. From an image perspective, our team always tests 3 to 4 images for each social post, and then they'll sponsor the top performer. We've also found that featuring people in an image, like the image on the left, versus an object, tends to perform better. And for copy, you want to try to include a stat in your social post, and you want to keep your copy short and to the point. And if you think that the article itself might actually need some help, you can take the approach that one of our clients does. They're a major insurance brand, and they wanted to target a new audience of small business owners, but they wanted to make sure that the content that they were promoting would resonate among them. And so they recruited a panel of small business owners who regularly review their content, and they provide candid feedback to them so that they can make any edits and refine it before they publish. So as I mentioned, only 22% of content marketers feel like they're really successful at content marketing. But through a content audit and some of these simple hacks, you can make sure that the content you're promoting addresses your audience with the right message at the right stage. But the key to remember is always to test new things. So with that, I'll turn it over to Becca.
Thanks, Allison. That's a great setup, and I think you have lots of really good insights and tips given where you're coming from. So appreciate you starting it off on the right foot. So I'm here to talk about, how Visually can help with some of the content strategy aspects of your marketing efforts, and then we'll also kind of give a light demo to just kind of show you how we actually execute work on our platform. Many of you may or may not know, but Visually is typically known as this on-demand content creation platform. And while we do create beautiful visual content, we actually offer strategy as part of our offerings. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide, Bobby. I think everyone probably knows by now that without some sort of strategic framework, you're really kind of lost knowing what to do with your content, or whatever you are doing is really just a shot in the dark, and it's kind of like, you just hope and pray that it might work, or you might see conversion or return. The thing is, with strategy, it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of dedicated time and thinking and resources. So oftentimes I think companies just don't have either the right teams or enough bandwidth on their teams to be able to dedicate some real meaningful time to getting this planned. But what we do know is that it is well worth the effort and the time, because it will pay off in the end with your content. So as far as what strategy offerings we offer here at Visually, we can head to the next slide. We do really everything you can think of. This isn't actually a comprehensive list, but I think it's our most popular items. And to Allison's point, we always recommend also starting with an audit, and we can also audit messaging architecture and messaging points and pillars for your organization. A lot of companies don't realize that they have these, or they don't realize that they do have them, but that's just not kind of how they're referred to internally. But kind of getting this baseline and getting a pulse on where your content and where your brand stands, is a really healthy way to start with an analysis of where you're at, so it can inform where you're going to go with your content in the future. We also build messaging from scratch. We've helped with brand new kind of startups build their messaging pillars, and that's always really helpful and kind of gives, again, some kind of foundational points to work from as far as themes and topics for your content. And personas is a really important one. There are very large-scale companies that have entire teams and departments and research teams dedicated to personas, and sometimes it gets pretty ridiculous how detailed these personas can get, but they don't have to be that detailed. It doesn't have to be a first and a middle and a last name and everything down to like the flavors that person likes, but that's how intense these can get. But at a very baseline, you want to know just general demographics. What are these people interested in, and where are they consuming their content, I would argue, is one of the most important things. User journeys, Allison touched on that, just knowing where these people are going. and where they're consuming the content and where they're coming from, to get to your website or your blog or your social feeds. We also do editorial calendars, just coming up with, a long list of ideas and kind of a schedule of content based on all these things that we've talked about. And then just ideation, if maybe you have all these things in place and you really just need some kind of conceptual thinking, we can also bring that to the table. And of course, like we know visually, we can actually create the content from scratch. So that's just kind of a quick overview of the different things that we can provide when it comes to strategy services. So as far as how we tackle our strategic work and our offerings, everything really starts with the discovery phase. And this is so important because, it really gives, again, that baseline. And there's a lot of questions that we ask during this phase. And I think there's a lot of value in working with an outside party in doing the discovery process. It's just an objective perspective and lens that, we all, when we're in kind of our day-to-day work, tend to overlook certain things, or we're just so used to seeing things, or we, are focused on a particular angle, and having kind of a new, fresh set of eyes can really help discover, new angles and new messaging opportunities, or maybe, new content topics, all sorts of things. But at this point, we really want to define and understand what are the business goals? What are you trying to achieve? What is going to be the end result at the end of your, 12-month campaign or quarterly campaign, whatever it might be. At the same time, equally important, and I would actually say more important, is understanding and defining the user goals of your audience. And if you think about kind of if you envision a straight line, to me, these things are inherently and traditionally polar opposites. Especially because if you come from kind of the old way of quote unquote advertising, it's very salesy, and it's very much about how you operate and what you do and what you can do for people. And that's all important. But how that gets packaged and how that gets messaged to a customer today is so much different, and it has to be very nuanced and very casual, very relevant, very meaningful in order to get people to listen. Because there's a lot of noise out there. So you want to stand out, and you want to stand out in a way that, people will resonate with. So if you think about kind of, again, this line, you got business goals on one side, which are important to define. You've got user goals on the far right side, which are also important to define. And to me, you want to make sure that your strategy is somewhere right on the center point of that line. If not on the center point, more toward the right, toward user goals, is going to actually make more effective content. Even though it might seem you're ignoring the business goals on the left, you're not. You're just coming around them at a different angle. Historical work. So, this is kind of a part of that content audit, I would say, really kind of looking at everything that you've done. And also you want to think about, content very comprehensively. It's not just visual pieces that you're promoting on LinkedIn or Facebook or what have you. It's also email blasts. It's conference and marketing materials. It's blog posts. It's really anything that is giving information about your company, your product, your services. That's content. Gap analysis. Allison mentioned this as well. You want to really identify, not just types of content that you're missing, like maybe your audience actually prefers to get their information in snackable, digestible ways as opposed to big, long white papers or ebooks. For some companies, that's going to be the total opposite. It really just depends on who you're speaking to and how they consume their content. So the gap analysis could reveal types of content. It could also reveal messaging opportunities or topics and themes. And then another kind of third area that we look at is platform, and channels. Maybe a lot of your people are on a different kind of distribution channel that you're not thinking of. There are some brands, we've helped promote things on Snapchat. Lancome, for example, like using filters for Lancome makes sense on Snapchat. Now that might not make sense for, some kind of B2B, maybe energy industry, right? You got to think about your brand, your people, your audience, and what platforms. So that's another kind of gap area that we look at. And then success metrics. Overall, you are what you measure. So you want to make sure that you are defining clear goals and KPIs and set benchmarks, and you might not reach those benchmarks immediately, the big thing with content and good content strategy is that it's a long play. Don't expect to necessarily see fantastic results overnight with one piece of content. If you do, great. That's awesome. But don't expect it every single time necessarily, and certainly don't expect it with your kind of first attempt as you're kind of reworking your strategy. Think of it as a slow build and a long play. So we can go into the personas. So I'll kind of quickly go through these because I think we've touched on them. But again, you really want to figure out who are your audiences. You really want to think about what interests them, and why are they interested in certain things. And again, you want to think about those user goals. So when you're thinking about personas, you have a Jane Doe, she likes, yoga, and she typically spends most of her time on Instagram, and, let's say she actually reads magazines. You want to think about all aspects, and content is not only digital. You want to think about hard, kind of more traditional models of content too, as a part of your content strategy. You want to reach people wherever they're at, and that's a big part of personas. We can go on. So the messaging content audit, this is, again, identifying what you've done, to reveal some of those, gaps and opportunities, but you also want to see how has that content performed. And even if you didn't set up true KPIs and measurement goals for the content that you've already produced, you could probably have enough color and context to identify if there was one piece of content that seemed to really drive a lot of, traffic to your website or help improve attendance at a conference. It can take a little bit of detective work, but you really want to see how content is performing overall. And you also want to think about what you're saying and why you're saying it. And again, that all ties back to that kind of discovery phase and kind of identifying that equilibrium point between business goals and user goals, and make sure that you're at least somewhere in the middle of what you're saying and why you're saying it. It's not just for you, it's also for your audience. You want to be relevant. As far as the user journey, we touched on this, and Allison talked about this at the top of her presentation. But again, you really want to think about your content in the appropriate stages, and I liken it to dating. You don't want to go too fast with your content. You want to kind of take it slow, get to know your prospective user. You want to be really meaningful and thoughtful with them in the beginning, and again, relevant in the beginning, because you want to hook them. You don't want to go in guns a-blazing telling them about all the things that you can do for them and come off with that, again, overly salesy, over pitch-like tone, because it's just, quite frankly, a turn-off. So really defining kind of the points in your purchase funnel is also a part of that whole user journey definition. And then you want to talk about and look at the actual personas that you created and map them to the right places and kind of figure out, what is Jane doing at stage 1 versus John doing at stage 3. It may be different. So just think about, your content in stages. Think about it relative to the purchase funnel. Think about it relative to your personas. As far as the editorial calendar, I am a big believer that good content strategy is as much about execution as it is about strategy. And that's really kind of my life view, to be honest. I think that, we need a lot of do leadership in addition to thought leadership. So, you can't have any action from your strategy unless you do the work and you do the work well. And a big part of content is being organized and planning in advance and getting a regularly kind of broadcast going of your content, and having a calendar in place really helps with that, not only to ensure that you are consistently publishing, which is really important because you want to build that trust and that credibility with your audience that you're going to always be giving them something that they need or that they want, but you also want to make sure that you're not just shooting from the hip because, oh shoot, we only planned until the end of March and now it's April, the second week of April, and I didn't plan any content, so I'm just going to pull something out. Well, then that's not really making all of the strategy work that you did up front really effective. So all that planning is really important in the beginning for the strategy, but you've got to also plan how you're going to, schedule and distribute that content over the course of a calendar. So I can't emphasize enough how important getting this on a calendar is. And then ideation. So this is kind of the last point, is just, this is where the kind of creative juices, start flowing and can be, kind of more more on the fun side, the dessert side of content strategy. And, you know, on the visually side, this is where our freelancers and our designers and creative directors get really excited. But, you know, this is where the magic happens. But unless you've done all of the pre-work and have that strategic framework in place, it's not meaningful or purposeful magic. It's just magic, and it may or may not resonate with your audience, which is a risk that you can take, and some people do take it. But it could also be a waste of resources and effort if it doesn't actually perform the way that you want it to. So this is where the fun ideas happen, you know, but you want to make sure that the ideation is happening within the themes that you've come up with and fitting within the messaging pillars and all of the, you know, user journeys and personas, everything we've talked about. It all has to tie into that. So that's just, again, a general overview of kind of how we tackle our strategic offerings and our general flow. Of course, you know, we do kind of customize and tailor it to each customer's needs, because everyone that we see come through our door is really at different stages. Again, we worked with startups all the way to kind of Fortune 500 and up companies. So it really depends on the customer's need. But just a kind of a quick kind of rundown on why Visually is a good option for content strategy or any other sort of content needs. You know, there's three kind of components. We have really high quality creative talents. This is a global marketplace of over 1,000 freelancers of all types. Strategists, writers, project managers, developers, creative directors, designers, illustrators, you name it, animators, 3D modelers. We've got every single type of creative that I think you could think of. And they've been highly vetted and certified. And then we do everything, you know, like I said, we start with strategy, and we do everything from, you know, writing blog posts to, you know, creating really beautiful, long, in-depth hero pieces, like Allison calls them, you know, whether those are ebooks or white papers. And it's really just a better way to work. And what I mean by that is that, you know, we can get you communication and content way faster than traditional models. You know, you think about an Uber, right, is an on-demand service. At the end of the day, they're getting you from point A to point B. It's a service, but it's powered by technology and through a platform. And that's what Visually is. At the end of the day, we are a service. We're going to give you content. We're going to give you strategy, but we are powered and enabled through a very cool platform that helps you work faster and work efficiently. So I'll go into just a little bit more and then show you guys a demo. But like I said, you know, we have tons of creative professionals all over the world. Each of the verticals, whether it's graphic design, video, content strategy, writing, we have creative directors that oversee each of the stable of freelancers. So again, there's a lot of high touch when it comes to the vetting and the ongoing quality management with these professionals, and I think that's a big differentiator for us. And our talent, you know, they're so eager to work with our clients, and they have so many cool opportunities. And it's also a good way to just keep your content and your look and feel very fresh. We've had a lot of brands come to us because they actually need a new look. You know, they're kind of tired of the same old stuff that their team, you know, is kind of tied to or beholden to. So lots of great reasons why you'd want to use our actual talent pool. On the next slide, for the full creative service, you know, we really, oh, this is still on talent, sorry. We are the ones that actually handpick your talent for you. So we take all of the details of your project scope. You know, let's say it's going to be a 3D video, and there's a certain look and feel that you've identified in your creative brief that you want. Well, we have created all of the data around our talent to be able to match perfectly to your project. Not just from a creative kind of aesthetic standpoint, but from a skills and experience standpoint, and sometimes even from a time zone standpoint, because again, we have people all over the world, and sometimes there's benefits in having a team that's several time zones ahead of you, and sometimes teams need to be really in sync and in the same time zones. But we're the ones that handpick the talent for you, and that's part of our service to you. Okay, we can head to the next one. So again, you know, we can do absolutely everything and anything. You know, we even do interactive work, and we've actually even built products and tools for companies, believe it or not. We have some really incredible developers that are so nimble. And the other thing to kind of note on kind of the full creative service is that sometimes there's really kind of unique and interesting and bespoke work that you might want to do for certain pieces of your content. You know, like let's say it's technical illustration. Well, even if you have a creative team, you probably don't have the resources to be able to dedicate to hire a technical illustrator full time. So this is also a great way to kind of leverage our services and our talent pool to kind of fill in just bespoke needs that you have throughout the year for your content. Okay, we can head to the next one. And ultimately, whether it's your project manager or coordinator or writer or proofreader, we really do try to be just an extension of your team. We want to be quick and responsive and available to you. And again, our platform really allows us to feel like that extension of your team and just feel like you can count on your designer to help, change your deadline if you needed to. Our team is ready to rock and roll and move because we understand content and deadlines can often be moving targets. So we're very flexible and very fluid. And I think those are attributes that you would consider, with full-time teams. So just at a high level, after, we figure out what you need for your content, you get introduced to our platform and you fill out all the details in your creative brief. And these are strategic questions, but they're also kind of project management type questions, like when is your deadline? What are the specs of the work, kind of more logistics. After we get all that information, we match the talent to you, and then your project kicks off. So it's really that simple. And as far as the project kickoff and the creative brief, I'm going to go ahead and just show you guys kind of a quick demo of kind of how it looks, and let Allison speak to, from a client perspective, how our platform has been easy to work with on some of her projects. So Bobby, if you want to hand over my screen, I can show the Visually platform. Okay. All right, so right now I'm looking at kind of a dashboard, and this is a demo account, and it looks like Brad M has quite a bit of projects, but this is kind of just a high level quick snapshot view of all your different projects that are going on, and you can kind of see, obviously Brad's a little bit behind, there's a lot of things that are overdue, but you can just get a quick view of kind of how many days you're into your projects, how far along it is based on the sliding scale. But what I really want to show you is the actual activity feed once you're into a particular project. I mentioned that, after we identify what you actually need, let's say, in this case, it's actually an interactive, a microsite. What we need to really match your team is all of this information in the creative brief. And we've tailored the creative brief to match your needs specifically, the actual components that you wanted for your interactive or your video or your infographic, as well as, there are certain questions that make sense to ask per vertical as well. So all that's tailored for you. All you have to do is answer the questions. Really nice interface, very easy. We often give you prompts, or multiple choice options, but lots of text field for you to kind of really communicate to your team all the details of what you may or may not be wanting. But you can see that, there's kind of these main section areas of, the objective of your content. The creative inspiration is a really nice interface. This has already been selected, but if you were coming in for the first time, you'd see a grid of, I think, 12 options. And so there's a look and a feel, but we also kind of describe, what are you trying to achieve with the overall aesthetic of your content. And then you can also give some more details, and you can say, well, I actually like, the way this looks, but I actually don't want sepia, I want full color. So again, just trying to be flexible, but also give you guys some ideas and some prompts about what you might want. We go on, there's questions about the audience, right? And again, if you know your personas, this is going to be really helpful, and you might already have a lot of these questions answered. Existing materials, what are you going to provide to your team? Logos, maybe you don't need a writer, you already have your content. Execution is a big one, how do you want certain things built out? And in this case, these are specific interactive questions. And then project management, do you want to have a kickoff call? Let's talk about deadlines. Let's talk about the schedule overall. So you have time to complete this, and you can invite other people from your team so that they can contribute to this, or they can contribute on the activity feed. But after you've submitted this, we assign your team, and your team is over here on the right, and you can see everyone. You can go look at their profiles. You can see kind of who they are on your team, designer versus project manager versus writer. And then your activity feed is kind of really the main hub. It's where everything happens. And think about this as kind of any sort of, news feed. It's continuously scrolling, and, you can reply back. You can, have attachments to your posts. What's really cool is our timeline over here on the right-hand side. You can actually integrate into your own calendars, and I'm pretty sure we've integrated with, Windows email clients, Gmail, as well as Microsoft. But you also just have a good kind of timeline to follow here. And it not only has the name of the milestone and when it's due, but also who is the owner of that milestone, whether it's you as the client or, members of your team. And when a certain deliverable is met, when a milestone is met, it kind of gets checked off as you go. So in this particular case, we're at designer review. So the designer owns this milestone, and it's kind of stalled here until he or she completes their action item. So this is all designed to kind of keep the project flowing, help stay organized. You can be very communicative with your team through the actual activity feed, but we also have a chat feature, so you can actually chat one-on-one with any of your team members, as well as fellow team members on your own company. All the files are organized for you. You can also access them through the activity feed, but here they are organized as far as anything that you uploaded for the creative brief, or things that you want to upload for brand assets, like your logos, your colors, your fonts. And then all the project files, all the versions of everything that's been uploaded. And this holds all sorts of types of file types, depending on your project. So I'm going to take a quick pause there and, just see if Allison, do you have anything to kind of weigh in on from your perspective, actually using this as a client? What are some of your favorite features about our platform?
Yes, we use it quite often. In fact, with every project that we work with visually on for our clients. And I think, I would say the best part about it is that it's really easy and intuitive to use. It doesn't require any training, which is really key since we're all so busy. But a few of the specific features that we've really appreciated, and I know our clients have as well, is when you were going through the creative brief, having that inspiration, being able to pick some examples of creative is really helpful, because it can be really hard to articulate what type of kind of creative look and feel you're looking for, and being able to reference some examples of things that you like is really handy. Also, having the calendar milestones right in the interface, and then having those kind of update as you go if you have to tweak the schedule, just really helps with accountability. A lot of times the projects we're working on involve multiple teams on the client side and the agency side, so this just helps everybody kind of stay on track.
Yeah.
And then I guess I would say lastly, it really helps keep track of all the feedback and the different versions of creative, which helps, if you're kind of leading the project, it helps you stay organized, but it's also really helpful for our clients from a compliance standpoint. They can direct their compliance teams all to one location where all the different versions and iterations are housed.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And, I think it's also, everything's kind of here for you. Like you said, it's very easy and intuitive to use, and you have a whole team and even a project manager who's a part of our talent team to help support you. But if you ever need additional support, you can always reach out to, your Visually account director. We have kind of this like pulse button right now. How are you feeling about your project? And you can also always reach out to our help desk. So we have just a huge support team that's ready to help step in if there are any, scope changes that you might have, or if you have concerns about some of your deliverables and want to talk about it, or maybe you've changed your mind about the direction of the project and need some help thinking that through. Tons of ways to really kind of, help support you at any point in your project. Michelle, I think that's probably everything I have to show on the demo, if you guys want to take back over the screen.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Becca. And thank you to our listeners. Hopefully the insights and advice shared today have been beneficial to you. And what's important is that you get some really good takeaways to help develop your content marketing strategy. So now it's time for the Q&A. And there were actually a number of questions that came in related to how to find that right balance. As content marketers, we are accountable to a lot of different stakeholders, so marketing versus product versus sales. And when our content budgets are so limited, what's the best approach in deciding where to divide our efforts? Maybe Allison, you could answer that based on your experience with
Sure.
your B2B clients?
Yes, no problem. I think one of the things that we often reference is this 411 rule, which was actually originally developed for Twitter. But it basically says that you should be publishing 4 pieces of what we consider to be helpful or useful content for every piece of branded content and every piece of promotional content that you're publishing on the platform. That you really should be testing to make sure that the mix is right for your brand. Another kind of tactic that some of our marketers use is to sequence their content, right? So you want to start maybe with promoting awareness building content, like an aspirational blog post. And then, once someone's engaged with that content, then you retarget them with a branded message that shows how your specific solution can help people achieve those aspirations. But I think, just in terms of budget allocation in general, the key really is to produce your content more efficiently so that you have enough budget to promote it effectively, and you have budget for testing as well. So, some of those examples that we referenced earlier are really helpful in doing this, like taking your existing content and creating derivative pieces from it, or perhaps creating multiple versions of social posts in order to test your content. All that really helps you scale and get more mileage out of your existing assets, which really helps cut down those production costs.
Definitely. And Becca, you had mentioned the gap analysis and aligning your content to the buyer's journey. Do you have any insight into advice on how to go about dividing content by different departments and what their needs are?
Well, I think it's a continual struggle, right, against different departments. But I think that keeping the user at the forefront is critical. And I love the 411 rule, but I would even go like way overboard, and I would say just think about the user, because again, it's about creating that credibility and getting that trust from the users that you are actually there to help serve them. And I think that, Allison's formula that she shared earlier was really good. It has to be useful, enjoyable, and inspirational. I mean, there's lots of elements to think about, what makes good content to try to get people interested. But again, you want to think about that purchase funnel in terms of, think about yourself as a buyer. When you're first doing research, what are the key things that you're looking for to help whittle down your choices? Put yourself in their shoes and really think about, what would come across as overboard or, more importantly, irrelevant at that point in the stage of your research process or your buying process. So putting yourself in the user's shoes and putting the user first would be my top recommendations.
All right, thank you. Another question for you, Becca, is one of the most basic and widespread hurdles for a content marketer is, how do we even know where to get started? There's so much data, customer data and information out there. And what would be your tips on what are the first steps to even go about developing a strategy?
Well, I think that the audit is really the first place to be, because we all know that you've already created some sort of content. So it's an easy place to start, and I think it's less overwhelming than just trying to come up with personas from scratch, right? So coming up with that audit, rounding up all the content that you've done and just taking a step back and look at it. Look at it from an aesthetic standpoint. Do they all look the same? Do they have the same tone? If not, that's a really easy fix, and that's actually can go a long way to building kind of brand brand equity and kind of trust with your audience. It's a very simple thing, right? It's not real strategy in terms of like what's going to lead to ultimate conversion, but all of these things add up. And again, I feel like those are like kind of the less intimidating things to do. You also want to think about, evaluating purpose to platform, right? And we kind of talked a little bit about that earlier. Seeing where did you distribute certain types of content and asking yourself, was it appropriate to share there? Are people really reading long form things on this particular platform, or is it a more snackable platform? So looking at your past distribution as a part of that audit and then tying to performance is a good place to start. As far as all the data that's out there, it can be pretty overwhelming, and I'm all in favor of quantitative data for sure. But I think it's kind of gone a little bit overboard lately. So my advice is this, trust the qualitative side as well, and do some real kind of critical thinking and human analysis, and a gut check against some of these things, in addition to looking at some of the hard data. And the hard data, think about all of the tools that are accessible to you through actual platforms, and you can always probably upgrade and get like a little bit more. And then there are, of course, very costly, measurement tools out there that you can invest in. But, looking at engagement metrics, I think are some of the more interesting things. How are people interacting with your content? Is a good starting point. So you don't have to go too crazy with all of the data that is available.
All right, thank you very much. Allison, this is a question for you in regards to LinkedIn. Can you actually give some examples of some of the more successful B2B marketers and how they've used content and distributed on LinkedIn?
Sure. This kind of supports Becca's last point regarding kind of consistency and look and tone. I think that's one kind of easy fix that a lot of brands can implement, and a lot of brands just simply don't, and it's probably because they're sharing a variety of different types of content and content from different sources on our platform. But some of the brands who do this really well, for example, are Ernst & Young, and if you want to take a look at their content, either look what they're sharing on LinkedIn or check out their blog, Better Working World. Other brands that do this have a really consistent look are IBM's Think Marketing Initiative. Caterpillar also has a very consistent look and feel and tone of voice as well. Microsoft with their Story Labs. Those are some of the top B2B marketers overall, but there are also brands who've done a great job on LinkedIn specifically in making sure that they're consistent in their message and then also have a strong, identifiable look and feel so that it's obvious when you see a post that's coming from them in the feed. And that just really helps them establish credibility and develop kind of an ongoing relationship with their audiences.
So how much would you say should be the divide on creation versus distribution in terms of time and effort, and like what successes have you seen through these particular examples that you just gave?
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky question to answer. And the short answer is it depends. Some brands that we work with spend the bulk of their budget on content creation, and then the rest on distribution, maybe like a 60-40 or 70-30% split. But we would advise that, as I mentioned, the key is to really producing content more efficiently to make sure that you have a sound distribution plan in place, because what use is it to create really incredible content if your audience isn't going to see it? And you really simply cannot rely just on organic publishing to do that. You have to be thinking about sponsoring your content, amplifying it so that it reaches new audiences, and that you're engaging those potential targets early on in their decision-making phase, because as we know, it takes about 10, if not more, pieces of content for a client or a prospective client to make a decision. So, I think the key is really to create as much derivative content as you can, be efficient with your production, and make sure that you have a solid distribution plan in place, and test different platforms, test different audiences, as well as messaging.
All right, thank you very much. Another question for Becca. Um, can you give a bit more background into the different types of organizations and the sizes of these organizations that tend to use the Visually platform?
Man, it is all shapes and sizes, I have to say. We worked with, again, so many startups, but we've also worked with, Fortune 50 companies. And I think that the needs there are very different in a lot of ways, but they're also the same. And what I mean by that is on the startup side, there's no internal resources to be able to give to content or subject matter experts for that matter. So they need someone to outsource that work to. On the bigger side of things, they actually have maybe too many resources that there isn't enough to be dedicated to their particular campaign. Because oftentimes, with these larger companies, they have so many different creative teams, but they're within certain departments, and there's a lot of actually rigid brand guidelines that oftentimes their internal resources have trouble breaking out of, and sometimes for certain campaigns they need it to be broken out of. So they're similar in that they both don't have internal resources, but they're coming from different reasons why they don't have them. We do have a lot of B2B, customers, but we also have some B2C too. So that's the beauty of our platform, is that we're really set up to be so fluid and flexible to meet really any company's needs. And I think it's less about the industry or the size, and it's more about, at the end of the day, all companies, all brands have to have content to be relevant. And whether that content is going to serve a smaller company or a bigger company, it's actually the same process to get it done. And it's the same set of questions that you ask to make great content. They're just going to have different answers, and they're going to have a different output at the end of the day.
All right, thank you very much. Um, Going back to actually on the same topic of the variety of different sizes and industries that we or that Visually caters to, a lot of companies will have agencies that they use, or their own freelancers, or again their internal departments. So for those who work with those different types of partners, what would be the biggest differences between using a marketing technology like Visually versus the more traditional avenues?
Well, I'm an agency girl. That's where I come from. So, I know what I'm saying when I say with agency, there's a lot of layers and there's a lot of red tape. And it isn't intentional, actually, but when you have kind of account executives and account directors and account managers, and you have project managers, and you have junior designers, and you have a creative director or a chief creative officer, that's a lot of team members that start to add up and can actually slow down the creative process. So speed is an issue. And then the cost. You think about, billable rates for all of those roles that I just mentioned, and there could be, a handful of more roles that are on a particular account. Billable rates add up. And there are some agencies that work on project fees, but for the most part, agencies lose money doing project fees. So that's why, it goes to this hourly system. And because there's naturally tons of iterations that happen throughout the creative process, those hours just add up. So cost becomes a real factor. And so with Visually, not only do you have the speed of the platform, and there's not all these layers of additional people that are managing your account and your project on a day-to-day basis, you're just working directly with the team that's creating your content, which is highly efficient. And actually empowering, I think, for both the clients and for the actual creative teams. There's just kind of no one standing in their way of true creative output. And then on the speed side of things, it's just, again, we are set up to be so nimble and to be flexible, whereas when you have an agency, there's going to be lots of other projects that you don't know about, right? You don't want to tell your client that you've got kind of other clients, that you're working on their projects, but there's a lot of internal reshuffling that will have to happen when deadlines move, and deadlines almost always move. So there's a lot of hidden inefficiencies that happen on a deadline side of things on agencies that, again, is so liberating on our platform, because we have so many different freelancers that are working on all these projects. They're not under the same pressures and the same schedules the way that an agency's resources are. Now, that said, I will say we actually have agencies that are clients of ours. They actually come to us to actually scale out their own operations because they either know of those internal struggles I've just mentioned, there's a cost factor, or there's a subject matter expertise factor. Let's say that they really did need to have someone that could do 3D modeling for a stop motion video. Not everyone has those capabilities, especially at an in-house agency if it's not like a video production shop. So I'm not trying to, downplay agencies. Like I said, that's where I came from, and they serve a purpose and they have a lot of value. But when it comes to the world of constantly churning out content on a budget, you've got to make those dollars go further, to Allison's point. You've got to be more efficient with how you produce that content. And Visually is a really great way to do that. There's also other tactics that you can do, just creating actual kind of templates and setting your own kind of campaign brand guidelines, that helps you churn out content quickly. But it really comes down to kind of dollars, and the way that we are set up as a marketplace is just a lot more cost effective.
Okay, thank you, Becca. And we have time for one more question. And someone had asked, this is towards Allison. You mentioned on one of your slides to constantly be testing, and 3 to 4 images is what you recommend. Could you go into a little bit more depth over best practices when it comes to testing content on LinkedIn?
Sure. There's actually a great ebook too that I would direct you to. If you go to business.linkedin.com, there's a whole recap of a lot of our testing best practices when it comes to content and social post testing. But there's a couple of different strategies that our clients deploy when it comes to testing. Some brands will first publish content organically, and then they'll see what posts get the most engagement, and then they'll amplify those through sponsored content. But that really just depends on how big your social following is. If you have a smaller social following, that might not be the best strategy. I think generally the most straightforward way to test on LinkedIn is through what we call direct sponsored content, like dark posting. And that allows you to test multiple pieces of content or different social posts at a given time. And we recommend, as a general practice, to test 2 to 4 options at any given time, sort of depending on your audience size. If you have a smaller audience size, a couple is probably fine. But if you have a generous audience size, you want to test up to 4 different options. And those options can be as simple as 4 different headlines or different images, or even slight tweaks to the intro copy. Again, some of those small tweaks that you might feel are really insignificant can lead to a big lift in performance.
Okay, so that concludes today's webinar. Thank you very much for listening to the very end. And again, the presentation will be emailed out to you, and the recording will be made available on the Visually website. So if we weren't able to get to your question, please do feel free to email us at
Are there any other questions, Michelle?
No, I don't think so. So if there are any questions that people think of afterwards, then please feel free to email us at hello@visually. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care.